Let's begin. Threats in this position are: Queen takes pawn, check. Knight takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen to A8, check. Queen to B8, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Rook to F7. Queen to H2, check. King to F1. Queen to H1, check. King to F2. Queen takes pawn, check. King takes queen. Let's see the next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Checks in this position are: Bishop to B4, check. Answer to this puzzle is: Bishop to G4. Queen to G3. Bishop takes queen. Let's see the next puzzle. Here are the threats. Knight takes bishop. Rook takes bishop. Rook takes pawn, check. Rook takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are: Knight to G6, check. Rook takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is: Knight to G6, check. King to H7. Knight takes rook, check. Next puzzle. Here are the threats. There are no threats in this position. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen to H2, check. Knight to G3, check. Answer to this puzzle is: Knight to G3, check. King to G1. Knight takes rook. Let's continue. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes bishop. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes queen. Queen takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is: Queen takes queen. Rook takes queen. Rook takes bishop. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are: Queen takes rook. The checks are: Knight to F6, check. Solution to the puzzle is: Queen takes rook. Queen takes queen. Knight to F6, check. King to G7. Knight takes queen. Let's see the next puzzle. The threats are: Queen takes knight. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn, check. Here are checks in puzzle position. Rook to H1, check. Pawn takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is: Rook to H1, check. King takes rook. Queen to H8, check. Knight to H4. Queen takes knight, check. King to G1. Queen to H2, checkmate. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in this position are: Rook takes pawn, check. Here are checks in puzzle position. Promotes to queen, check. Promotes to rook, check. Rook takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is: Rook takes pawn, check. Rook takes rook. Promotes to queen, check. Next, threats in puzzle position are: Queen takes pawn. Queen takes knight. Here are the checks. Queen to F4, check. Rook to H1, check. The puzzle is solved using: Queen to F4, check. G3. Queen takes pawn, checkmate. Let's continue. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Rook takes rook. Queen takes pawn. Rook takes rook, check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen to D4, check. Rook takes rook, check. Solution to the puzzle is: Rook takes rook, check. Rook takes rook. Queen takes rook, checkmate. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in this position are: Rook takes bishop. Checks in puzzle position are: Bishop to G3, check. Bishop to C5, check. Rook to H2, check. Answer to this puzzle is: Bishop to C5, check. Bishop to E3. Rook takes pawn, check. Another puzzle. The threats are: Queen takes pawn. Knight takes queen, check. Pawn takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are: Knight to F3, check. Knight takes queen, check. The best move in puzzle position is: Knight takes queen, check. Bishop takes knight. Queen to D5. C6. Pawn takes pawn. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are: Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Bishop takes pawn, check. Rook takes pawn. Checks in this position are: Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Bishop takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is bishop takes pawn, check. King to h8. Bishop to g6. Queen to a1, check. Knight to c1. h6. Bishop takes pawn. Bishop takes rook. Pawn takes bishop. Let's see the next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is h3. Queen to h5. Bishop to e4. d5. g4. Pawn takes bishop. Pawn takes queen. Next, let us look at threats in puzzle position. Queen takes knight. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is knight to d5. Queen to c6. Rook takes knight. One more. Threats in puzzle position are bishop takes rook. Here are the checks. Rook to h1, check. The puzzle is solved using rook to h1, check. King to g2. Rook takes rook. Queen takes rook. Bishop takes rook. Next puzzle, here are the threats. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes rook. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes bishop. Pawn takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen takes rook. Rook takes queen. Rook takes rook. One more. Here are the threats. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Knight takes knight, check. Knight takes queen. The checks are queen takes rook, check. Knight takes knight, check. Knight to e2, check. The best move in puzzle position is knight takes knight, check. Queen takes knight. Queen takes rook, check. Another puzzle. The threats are bishop takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes rook. There are no checks in this position. The answer is queen to g5. Another one. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Here are the checks. d4, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. d4, check. Queen to g2. Queen takes queen, check. King takes queen. Pawn takes bishop. Another puzzle. Threats in this position are knight takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Bishop takes pawn. Checks in this position are queen takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is knight takes pawn. Rook takes bishop. Pawn takes rook. Another puzzle. The threats are rook takes pawn. Rook takes knight. Rook takes pawn. Knight takes knight. Bishop takes knight. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is rook takes knight. Rook to e8. Rook to f3. Next, the threats are there are no threats in this position. The checks are knight to f8, check. Knight to c5, check. Answer to this puzzle is knight to c5, check. King to e5. Knight takes rook. King to f4. g5. Another one. Here are the threats. Queen takes pawn. Bishop takes bishop. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using bishop takes bishop. Queen takes bishop. Rook to c6. Rook to c1. Rook to c8. Another one. Here are the threats. Rook takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Bishop takes bishop. The checks are bishop to e3, check. Solution to the puzzle is f5. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.